Hey, Greg. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great to have you. So let's just start with an overview. If you could explain to everyone watching, about the current state of identity verification systems.
I think it's understandable that there was a lot of change, of course, at the beginning of the pandemic and how organizations were going to have to deal with the idea that we weren't going to have the opportunity to have as much face-to-face interaction as we normally would. So being able to build trust using technology so that we could enjoy the same level of interaction when someone wanted to gain access to a service or wanted to be onboarded into an organization was very important. What I would say is, in terms of the state of identity verification right now, is there are a number of options. And one of the things that we need to be conscious of from a user perspective is that we're educating the users in the best way possible to understand what they get, depending on what the option is that they choose so far as a digital identity. But the other side is about the organizations, and the organizations that are choosing a technology to actually onboard users into their ecosystems. So one of the things that we're seeing is that this is now it's a board level conversation. Identity has become the front line of security because we have lost all the perimeters which we are used to. For example, the corporate perimeter. The corporate network is no longer the corporate network is now basically the internet, and users can be authenticating into the corporate systems from anywhere, their kitchens, from cafes, on the road. So what we're seeing is that the idea of onboarding users spans the whole organization. Of course, it has a technical consideration. It's about understanding from a technical perspective how you can create an identity which can be used across all of the interactions within a business or in the services which the user wants to interact with. There is also a very important governance and risk piece. How do we know from a governance and risk perspective that the people we're bringing into our ecosystem are in fact the people that we intend to, and we're not opening up our organization to more than significant fraud? The really important piece, though, is the user experience. The user experience demands that there is a convenient, safe, and private mechanism for me as a user to interact with the services that I want to enjoy, whether that be private services as a consumer, or whether it be onboarded into a corporate system so that I can perform the roles that I need to do in my daily role.
So thank you for that overview, Blair. It's probably worth now getting into the main drawbacks of the verification systems you've mentioned. Why are they imperfect?
I think one of the big concerns with identity verification systems is the fact that they are often deployed as point solutions, or they're deployed in silos. One of the biggest challenges, and it's somewhat ironic, identity should be a singular thing. You should have one identity. But the way that the market has actually evolved, we end up bringing identities into an organization multiple times. No problem. From a user perspective, that's not going to give a great experience, because do I use which credential do I use for which services? From an organizational perspective, it's not very good because it's very difficult to audit what's going on. There's also a limitation in utility. If we are only using technology to onboard and verify our identity, but that's where it stops, and we can't then use that same identity to authenticate ourselves further down the line in different transaction events or across different channels, then we're not doing the best by the technology. So I would say the biggest thing right now, which is a significant drawback, is the siloed approach. I think the other thing that's important to touch on, though, is the lack of standards which is being deployed across the verification and the larger identity authentication technology. There needs to be more collaboration between industry to understand which standards should be applied for which use cases. There's a lot of focus right now, for example, from a spoofing perspective in the context of facial recognition on the IBETA Level 2 standard. That is a good standard. It sets out the rules and the result that you should look for in certain scenarios as they relate to presentation attack detection. It is not the only standard which should be looked at. There are also the ISO standards, which are looking at presentation attack detection. They present different types of scenarios. So I think that the standards which are being documented as part of specifications and also coming out in tenders, for example, for identity verification technology, they have to look past singular standards. They have to cover a wider breadth and scope to take into account the full range of interactions which we expect users to have with our organizations.
Clearly, identity fraud is a growing problem. Like, from your perspective, what's the best way to prevent this?
I think there is no silver bullet with security. Security is always traditionally deployed successfully when it's considered in layers. If we focus on biometrics specifically, it has its own layers. We can talk about the storage of the biometric. We can talk about the application security as well as the infrastructure security. We can talk about the importance of encryption, both at rest and in transit. So one of the big things that we have to be conscious of there is that we don't consider biometrics as a technology in its siloed parts, but that we consider it as a technology end to end. It's from that interaction that a user has on an endpoint device and how we treat the biometric and make sure that it is captured securely, safely, and encrypted. But then it's all the way through to the storage and the matching and the eventual authentication into a system, which is also considered. So I think the layers of security as they relate to biometrics is very important. I think you also have to couple that with, again, and touching on the point there about standards. There are various performance standards which have to be front and center of mind when designing a biometric identity solution. Presentation attack detection performance, false accept rates, false reject rates. And it's always important as well to balance that user experience and convenience piece with the security and risk posture which is trying to be achieved in any given scenario. And it's also important to have the flexibility in the solution which is being used to give you adaptive authentication as and when you need it. I think the other thing that can help prevent some of the risks that we're seeing, and again I touched on it a moment ago, is collaboration. There are a lot of malicious actors out there which are looking to damage businesses, to steal identities, and to perform acts on behalf of people so far as fraudulent transactions. Industry has to work collaboratively to combat that. Every organization is vulnerable to being hacked, and every organization may know a little bit of extra information compared to another, depending on their maturity. And I believe strongly that sharing that information responsibly and collaboratively will overall improve the posture from a security and risk perspective against those who want to do us harm and cause disruption. So I think collaboration is a very, very good way to prevent some of the risks that we're seeing in industry at the moment.
We're pretty much out of time, Blair, but I'd like to ask one more question, if I may, and I'm going to conflate, it's two questions in one, really. How should business approach, more effective, identity strategies? Many people here are going to be thinking about their businesses, and if so, what kind of technology requirements do you think are necessitated by this?
I think what we've all learned, if you can use this platform as an example, is that even though we got locked down and there was massive amounts of disruption when COVID occurred, the fact that we had so much communication capability, we all had smartphones, we all had very capable webcams and laptops, etc. that is all we really need to be able to deploy identity verification technology for the use cases which are most prominent right now. I think that we have all the tools that we need, but there is definitely something to be said for understanding how the technology can be used across a wider set of use cases in our business, and certainly avoiding those silos which we're seeing cropping up.
Blair, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to you joining us later on.